My fiancé's childhood friend keeps trying to insert herself into our wedding. For those just joining us, here's the extremely condensed backstory. My now husband Jake, 29M, and I, 27F, got engaged last year after dating for 3 years. His childhood friend Sarah, 28F, immediately became a nightmare, inserting herself into every wedding decision, trying to plan our bachelor/bachelorette parties, suggesting she should be a bridesmaid, and even having the audacity to suggest we postpone our wedding because it conflicted with her vacation. The drama escalated to the point where we had to uninvite her, which led to her sending nasty messages, trying to turn mutual friends against us, and generally being completely unhinged. After my last update about 6 weeks ago, we thought things had finally died down. Sarah had been relatively quiet for about 2 weeks, and we were cautiously optimistic that maybe she'd finally gotten the message and decided to move on with her life. How naive we were. 3 weeks before the wedding, Sarah started what I can only describe as her final offensive. It began with a series of text messages to Jake that were, honestly, kind of pathetic. She was trying a completely different approach. Instead of the angry, demanding messages we'd gotten used to, these were all about how sorry she was, how she'd done some soul-searching, and how she realized she'd been going through a tough time and taking it out on us. The messages were actually pretty manipulative when you read between the lines. She kept talking about their special friendship and how she just wanted to be there for his big day like they'd always dreamed. She brought up specific memories from their childhood. Apparently they used to play wedding when they were kids, and she'd always been the maid of honor in their pretend ceremonies. She said she'd been looking forward to being part of his real wedding since they were 7 years old. Jake showed me all the messages, and honestly, I felt a tiny bit bad for her. Like, I could see how in her mind, she probably had built up this whole fantasy about being involved in his wedding, and our relationship had shattered that. But then I remembered all the absolutely insane things she'd done over the past year, and that sympathy evaporated pretty quickly. Jake didn't respond to any of the messages, which was the right call. We'd been advised by multiple people, including his therapist, yes, this situation was stressful enough that he started seeing someone, to maintain no contact. But Sarah wasn't done. When the text messages didn't work, she moved on to social media. She started posting these really vague but obviously targeted Instagram stories about toxic people, fake friends, and how some people change when they get into relationships. She shared a bunch of those generic quote graphics about loyalty and friendship and posted several throwback photos of her and Jake from high school and college with captions like "missing simpler times" and "when people actually cared about each other." The most infuriating part was that she was getting sympathy from people who didn't know the full story. Some mutual acquaintances started reaching out to Jake asking if everything was okay between them, saying Sarah seemed really hurt. A few people even suggested that maybe we should try to work things out since they'd been friends for so long. This is where Jake really stepped up and proved why I'm so lucky to have him. He didn't just dismiss these people or tell them to mind their own business. Instead, he took the time to explain the situation to anyone who asked. He was honest about Sarah's behavior without being cruel, and made it clear that this wasn't just some minor disagreement that got blown out of proportion. By the end of those conversations, everyone understood why she wasn't invited and were supportive of our decision. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah tried a different approach. She reached out to my maid of honor, my sister Emma. She found Emma on Facebook and sent her a long message about how she was concerned about me and Jake, and how I was isolating him from his old friends. She claimed that Jake had confided in her about having doubts about the marriage, complete lie, and that as his oldest friend, she felt obligated to speak up. Emma immediately screenshot the message and sent it to me. We were both incredulous. Like, did Sarah really think this was going to work? That my own sister would believe some random woman over me? Emma wrote back a polite but firm message telling Sarah not to contact her again, and that if she was truly concerned about Jake, she should speak to him directly instead of going behind our backs. Sarah's response to Emma was unhinged. She sent a series of increasingly frantic messages accusing Emma of being part of the problem and claiming that our whole family was controlling and manipulative. She said Jake's family agreed with her. They absolutely did not. We'd kept them informed of everything, and they were horrified by her behavior. She ended by saying that she was going to save Jake from making the biggest mistake of his life. That message finally pushed us to take legal action. We'd been hesitant to go that route because it felt like overkill, but the escalation was getting scary. We consulted with a lawyer and sent Sarah a cease and desist letter. It was pretty straightforward. Stop contacting us, stop contacting our families and wedding party, stop posting about us on social media, and stay away from all wedding-related venues and events. You'd think a legal document would be enough to make someone back off, right?
Wrong.
1 week before the wedding, Sarah made her boldest move yet. She somehow got in touch with our wedding venue and called pretending to be me. She told them there had been some family drama and that we needed to add one more person to the guest list, herself. She gave them her full name and dietary restrictions and everything. Thankfully, our wedding coordinator was on top of things and called me directly to confirm the change before making it official. When she told me what had happened, I was speechless. The coordinator said the woman on the phone had been very convincing and seemed to know a lot of details about the wedding, which is why she wanted to double-check. We immediately called the venue back and explained the situation. They were incredibly understanding and assured us that Sarah's name would be flagged in their system and that they'd require photo ID from anyone claiming to be us if there were any future changes. They also offered to have additional security on standby during the event if we felt it was necessary. At this point, Jake was done. He'd been trying to handle everything calmly and maturely, but this crossed a line. He called Sarah directly, the first time he'd spoken to her in months, and told her in no uncertain terms that what she was doing was harassment, that she was not welcome at our wedding, and that if she didn't stop immediately, we would pursue further legal action. According to Jake, Sarah completely broke down on the phone. She started crying and saying that she couldn't believe he was choosing me over their friendship. She said she'd been in love with him since high school and that she thought if she could just get him to see how wrong I was for him, he'd realize they were meant to be together. Finally, the truth came out. All of her behavior over the past year, the constant interference, the demands to be included, the attempts to sabotage our relationship, it was all because she was in love with him and couldn't accept that he was marrying someone else. Jake told her he had never seen her as anything more than a friend, that he was sorry if he'd somehow given her the wrong impression over the years, but that his feelings for her had never been and would never be romantic. He said he was hurt that instead of being happy for him, she tried to ruin what should have been the happiest time of his life. He told her that her behavior had killed any chance of them maintaining a friendship and that she needed to respect our wishes and leave us alone. Sarah's response was to hang up on him and then immediately start blowing up his phone with text messages. The messages were a mix of apologies, declarations of love, anger, and threats. She said she was going to show up to the wedding anyway because someone needed to speak up during the objections part of the ceremony. She claimed she had evidence that Jake was making a mistake. She didn't. She said she was going to fight for their love, like in the movies. We screenshot everything and sent it all to our lawyer. By the end of the day, we had filed for a temporary restraining order. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days before our wedding, cutting it pretty close, but it was the best they could do on short notice. I was nervous about the hearing because I'd never been involved in anything legal before, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Our lawyer prepared us well, though, and we had printed out months' worth of evidence. Text messages, social media posts, emails, the incident with the wedding venue, everything. Sarah showed up to the hearing with her own lawyer, which surprised me. She'd clearly put effort into her appearance. She was dressed professionally and had obviously been crying, but in a way that looked sympathetic rather than unhinged. Her lawyer argued that this was all a misunderstanding, that Sarah was just a concerned friend who was worried about Jake making a rush decision. They claimed that she'd never threatened us. Technically true, her messages were more manipulative than threatening, and that we were overreacting to what was essentially a friend trying to stage an intervention. Our lawyer was fantastic. She laid out the timeline of events clearly and calmly, emphasizing the pattern of escalating behavior and the impact it was having on our lives. She pointed out that Sarah's own words and her messages to Jake proved that her motivations were romantic, not friendly, and that her attempt to impersonate me at the wedding venue showed a concerning disregard for boundaries. The judge asked Sarah directly if she intended to attend our wedding. Her lawyer tried to answer for her, but the judge insisted on hearing from Sarah herself. Sarah said she just wanted to be there for Jake, and that she thought if she could just talk to him in person, she could make him understand. The judge was not having it. She granted the temporary restraining order and scheduled a follow-up hearing for after our wedding to determine if it should be made permanent. The order required Sarah to stay at least 500 feet away from both of us, our families, our wedding party, and all wedding-related venues. She was also prohibited from contacting us directly or indirectly through social media or other people. As we were leaving the courthouse, Sarah tried to approach Jake in the parking lot. Thankfully, our lawyer was with us and immediately called courthouse security. Sarah didn't get close enough to actually violate the restraining order, but it was clear that even a legal document wasn't going to deter her completely. That night, we made the difficult decision to hire security for our wedding. It felt ridiculous and sad that it had come to that, but we couldn't take any chances. We wanted to be able to enjoy our wedding day without constantly looking over our shoulders. True to form, Sarah had one more trick up her sleeve. 2 days before the wedding, she started reaching out to Jake's family members who she'd met over the years. She sent messages to his parents, his brother, his grandparents, anyone she could find on social media. The messages were masterfully manipulative. She talked about how much Jake's friendship had meant to her over the years, how she'd always been there for him during tough times, and how hurt she was to be excluded from such an important day. She said she understood that I might not want her there, but couldn't Jake's family help her understand why Jake was cutting her out of his life? She asked if there was anything she'd done wrong, and said she just wanted a chance to apologize and make things right. Jake's family handled it perfectly. His mom called him immediately after receiving the message and asked what was going on. When Jake explained the situation, his mom was furious that Sarah was trying to manipulate their family into getting involved. Jake's dad actually called our lawyer to ask if Sarah's messages constituted a violation of the restraining order. They didn't, technically, since she wasn't directly contacting us. Jake's brother took a different approach. He responded to Sarah's message with a simple, "I've heard Jake's side of the story, and I support his decision 100%. Please don't contact me or anyone else in our family again." When Sarah tried to argue and explain her side, he blocked her on everything. The most heartbreaking attempt was her message to Jake's grandmother, who's in her 80s and not very familiar with social media drama. Sarah wrote this long, emotional message about how she'd always looked up to Jake's grandmother and considered her like family, and how devastated she was to lose that relationship. She said she was worried about Jake and hoped his grandmother could help him see that he was making a mistake. Jake's grandmother called him in tears after receiving the message. She was so confused and upset, and kept asking what she'd done wrong to make Sarah feel like she was losing the family. It took Jake a long time to explain that Sarah wasn't actually part of the family and that her feelings were her own issue to deal with, not something his grandmother needed to worry about. That message to his grandmother was what finally made Jake truly angry. He'd been hurt and frustrated throughout this whole ordeal, but he tried to remain understanding since Sarah was someone who had been important to him for so long. But involving his elderly grandmother crossed a line that he couldn't forgive. Despite everything, our wedding day was absolutely perfect. We'd hired 2 security guards, one at the venue entrance and one who stayed near us throughout the day. It sounds paranoid, but having them there actually made us feel so much more relaxed. We knew that if Sarah did try to show up, it would be handled without us having to deal with it directly. The ceremony was beautiful. Jake cried when he saw me walking down the aisle, and I cried during our vows. Our families and friends were so supportive and happy for us. It really drove home how insane Sarah's behavior had been when we were surrounded by people who genuinely cared about our happiness. During the speak now or forever hold your peace part, I'll admit I held my breath a little. But of course, no one spoke up. The only sounds were happy tears from the audience and a few emotional sniffles. The reception was a blast. Everyone danced, the food was amazing, and we got so many wonderful toasts from our friends and family. Jake's best man, his brother, gave a particularly touching speech about how happy he was to see Jake with someone who truly understood and appreciated him. Around 9 p.m., One of the security guards came over and quietly told us that Sarah had driven by the venue twice but hadn't stopped or gotten out of her car. The venue was set back from the road and had a gate, so she couldn't see much anyway, but it was clear she knew where we were. The security guard said they'd called the police to report it since it was a potential violation of the restraining order, but since she didn't actually approach the property, there wasn't much they could do. Honestly, hearing that didn't even upset me. We were having such a wonderful time that Sarah felt like a distant problem from another life. Jake squeezed my hand when the security guard told us, and then we went right back to dancing with our friends. She didn't have the power to ruin our day anymore. The morning after our wedding, Jake woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages from Sarah. She'd apparently had some kind of breakdown during our reception and spent the entire night sending him increasingly desperate messages. The messages started out apologetic. She was sorry for everything she'd done. She realized she'd been wrong. She just wanted to be happy for us. But as the night went on and Jake didn't respond, they became more and more frantic. She talked about how empty she felt without him in her life, how she didn't know how to move on, how she'd built her whole identity around their friendship. The final message, sent at 4:47 a.m., just said, "I hope you're happy. I really do. I'm sorry for everything." We screenshot all the messages and sent them to our lawyer, then blocked Sarah's number completely. We'd been hesitant to block her before because we wanted evidence of her behavior, but at this point, we had more than enough documentation, and we just wanted her out of our lives completely. A few days later, we found out from a mutual friend that Sarah had deactivated all of her social media accounts and told people she was taking a break from everything to work on herself. She'd apparently quit her job and was moving back in with her parents in another state. Part of me felt bad for her. It was clear she was struggling with mental health issues and had built up this fantasy relationship with Jake in her head over the years. But mostly, I was just relieved that it was finally over. 3 weeks after our wedding, we had the follow-up hearing to determine if the restraining order should be made permanent. Sarah didn't show up, and her lawyer withdrew from the case. The judge granted the permanent restraining order without any opposition. Our lawyer said it was pretty unusual for someone to put up such a fight initially and then completely disappear, but that it probably meant Sarah had finally accepted that her behavior was inappropriate and was trying to move on. She warned us to stay vigilant though, because sometimes people who've been this obsessive will resurface months or even years later. It's been 4 months since our wedding, and we haven't heard from Sarah at all. We're still cautious about our social media presence, and we haven't unblocked her anywhere, but it seems like she's genuinely moved on with her life. Jake and I are doing amazing. We went on an incredible honeymoon to Greece. Sarah had suggested that Jake take her there as a friend trip before our wedding. The audacity still astounds me, and we've settled into married life beautifully. We bought a house together last month, and we're talking about starting a family in the next couple of years. The whole experience with Sarah was traumatic in a lot of ways, but it also made our relationship stronger. Jake and I had to learn how to handle conflict together, how to present a united front, and how to protect our relationship from outside interference. Going through something that intense and coming out the other side even more in love and committed to each other was actually pretty incredible. Jake has said several times that while he's sad about losing a friendship that had been important to him for so long, Sarah's behavior showed him who she really was underneath. He said that the Sarah he thought he knew, the loyal, supportive friend from his childhood, probably never existed, or at least hadn't existed for years. The real Sarah was possessive, manipulative, and willing to hurt people to get what she wanted. It's also made us both more aware of boundaries in our other friendships. We've had conversations with our close friends about what happened, and everyone has been so supportive. A few friends have shared their own stories about people who became obsessive or inappropriate, and it's made us realize that this kind of thing is more common than we thought. Looking back on everything, I think there were probably red flags about Sarah's feelings that Jake missed or ignored over the years. He's mentioned a few incidents that seem more significant in retrospect, times when Sarah got upset about him dating other people, when she made comments about his girlfriends that seemed overly critical, when she tried to monopolize his time during visits home from college. But honestly, I don't blame Jake for not seeing it. When you've known someone since childhood, it's hard to imagine that they might have ulterior motives for maintaining the friendship. And Sarah was clearly very good at hiding her true feelings most of the time. I also learned a lot about standing up for myself and my relationship. In the beginning, I was worried about coming across as the jealous girlfriend who was trying to break up a friendship. I bent over backwards to be accommodating and understanding, even when Sarah was being completely inappropriate. It took me a while to realize that setting boundaries doesn't make you controlling, it makes you smart.